Giles Cross, Chief Operating Officer of Anglian Care. Delighted to be welcoming you to this Leadership Insights episode for the Care Leaders Network podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Simon, for having me.
So we've been looking forward to having this conversation for a little while. You and I met at one of the care events last year, and I remember I mentioned this in my post, kind of letting people know that we'd be recording this episode. But your enthusiasm when we met was really infectious, and you're very passionate about kind of innovation and technology within the care sector. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a little while. Obviously, the subject matter for today is leadership, but I think that technology and innovation are particularly, and more and more so in today's in today's world that we live in at the moment, it's becoming a really key part of the way that people lead. So yeah, very much looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, as am I. And even in those conferences, you can see that technology, innovation, they're getting their own theatres now. People are talking about it much more. It's becoming more and more integral. Even the targets, Sajid Javid coming out and saying 80% of care providers to become digitalized by 2024. I think it's just an important thing on the agenda at the moment, and we'll speak about it later, I'm sure. But good leaders need to have their eye on the ball, I think, when it comes to that.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Well, without further ado, let's get stuck into the question. So, Charles, in your mind, do you believe that leaders are born or are they made?
Yeah, I think that leaders are made, and I think that's because you draw on your own life experiences. There's not one moment that you're born. You can't be a leader in isolation. And to say that a leader is born would mean that if they were isolated in a room and no one was around them, they'd still be a leader. And in reality, it's people. It's the projects you're working on. It's where you're able to have touch points within your own life that you're able to draw upon as a leader. Leaders, you can often see, or I do when I see strong leaders, and I think that they've always been that way. And wow, they seem so confident. They have so much conviction. And I think that's a false, perception almost. And that you have to take a step back and say, you may be an aspiring leader and you want to get there, but there is incremental steps that you have to take, and them experiences, them increments are your own sort of experiences. And I'd like to touch on a book that I read. I read a lot in terms of both business, but also other books, and Range by David Epstein. It's a fantastic book. I'd suggest it to absolutely anyone. And he talks about the differences between Tiger Woods and Roger Federer in this one chapter. And we've all heard the story of Tiger Woods and his dad pushing him, or even the Williams film. I mean, that came out recently. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's the same thing again. And they seemingly have been born with this incredible talent. And Tiger Woods, for example, has become the best in golf, or potentially one of the best sportsmen ever, in the way that he dominated for so many years. And then Roger Federer, on the other hand, his mum was a tennis teacher, and she would never coach her own son because he hit the ball in such a strange way that I'd never get on with it, and I'd be forcing him to do something, and it just didn't work out. So he tried swimming, etc., loads of other sports, and it wasn't until his early 20s, which is extremely late if you compare that to Tiger Woods swinging a club at the age of 3, that he then came back to tennis and used his unique perception, his unique perspective to really have some analogous thinking, and that, I believe, can sort of make someone a better leader. So they're both made, but through different pathways. But in each pathway, for me, that they're made, and each pathway, they need perseverance. So I think the key there is you just you need to embrace them experiences that you have along the way and the challenges.
So for you, it's about the accumulation of the lived experiences. Yeah, no, that's a interesting point, and kind of well made as well. So, and obviously these questions are somewhat interlinking, but do you believe that leadership is an art or a science, and why do you hold the perception that you have?
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a predisposition to science. I mean, I studied economics, which is social science, and I think I have more of an analytical brain, and I can't even draw a stick man. So I don't think artistic way of doing things is really my way. So I have to lean to the science and say that it's a science, because even when something might come across as artistic or creative, and a lot of things are, especially when it comes to leadership. If we talk about charismatic leaders who have long speeches and they're able to get an audience together and really get across their view in a really succinct way, a really powerful way. And there's many examples of leaders who have done that over time. And some people say, that's an artistic way of doing it. And I think the artistic way, because it's kind of intangible, science obviously follows a pattern. You can see, okay, I've improved over time due to X, Y, Z. With the artistic side, I suppose that goes to, as you say, it does link to the born, because if you're born a certain way, that almost gives this intangible sort of artistry about the way that you do things, and that's just sort of your character. But once again, I think it's more of a science, because I think things can be improved. I wouldn't like, as a leader or any person, to think that I had an artistic way and that was almost, that can be developed on. But if something can be developed, then in my eyes it's more scientific, and good communicators are able to improve their own leadership, and good leaders are able to improve their own leadership through things such as emotional intelligence, which once again may be seen artistic in the way that you communicate, but in reality, another book that I read, which was Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. And it was actually a better predictor of annual salary. They did a study in the US, and it was a better predictor than IQ. And I think if we treat some of these more, and there's been a lot more focus on emotional intelligence and the way that we communicate, and empathy is obviously a big quality within care, and something as a care leader, I think you really need to embrace and work on that. And I think that when you have that emotional intelligence, or when you look at leadership as a science, there's a lot of potential to then think, okay, how do I have that growth mindset? How do I develop on it? And I think that's really important.
Nice, thank you. And what would you say the difference is between management and leadership?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I don't believe that management and leadership are mutually exclusive. You can be a good manager, and you can be a good leader. Often, good managers are good leaders. And good managers, I think leadership can be seen as the accolade. You're a leader within your organization, but you need leaders across the spectrum. I mean, you need leaders in individual roles. I would say sort of the difference between them would be, as a leader, you need to be committed to innovation, for example, as we touched on just before. I know that if I were in a team, and the leader, or the executive level person wasn't aware of some of the new technologies, new processes, I would think that they need to be, in order to make everyone's job easier. I definitely feel that through new technologies, leaders are able to then make their product better, make the outcomes in a care delivery perspective better, and also as a leader, you need to have that clear vision. So a leader is to almost give the tools to the manager to then make their job easier and be an effective manager. So leadership is about having that clear vision, commitment to innovation, and I'll just touch on just another book, because as you can tell, it's sort of important, I think, that you get reference points and to have to ingest information, and I suppose we'll speak about that as leaders, how you have to take on new information and show that you can be flexible and adaptable as well. And a book that I read, The E-Myth, I remember going to a marketing conference, and this guy had this book. He brought a book out, and I thought, oh, interesting. Definitely have a look at that. And he had all these annotations and post-it notes sticking out of it, and it was, I couldn't believe it. And I said, what is this? We're at a marketing conference, and it was The Entrepreneurial Myth by Michael Gerber, and it was nothing seemingly to do with the marketing, but he said there's so many lessons within this book, you just have to read it. So I went back home and I thought, yeah, I'll buy it. And what he does, which is really interesting, I think it dovetails into this whole difference between management and leadership, is he splits what an entrepreneur is into 3 different sections. So you need to have a technician. I mean, in the example of this book, he uses a bakery, or a woman starting a bakery. So you need to know how to bake a cake. So within care, you need to know how to deliver care. You need to know how to manage people. So you have the technician, the manager, and that's extremely important. And then the entrepreneur. And if I just make a sort of a segue back to the question of management and leadership, I think it's the entrepreneurial side, to take calculated risks, back to the innovation, but to take the different variables within a business and then show conviction in your decision. And I think sometimes you can, as leaders, we can wait for all of the information. I think we can want to always make the right decision, but I don't think that's really possible always. So you just have to take in the information that you have and make sort of conviction within that. So I think that difference is it's providing leaders provide managers with the tools so that they can have a more effective job, an easier job.
Got you. Perfect. Thank you for explaining that. So at what point would you say somebody becomes a leader?
I think that's interesting, because I think what your podcast does is so well in highlighting so many leaders, and I'm not sure how many of them would say they're a leader in their own right. I mean, some will, and definitely definitely should be doing that because of sort of their life experiences, their successes, 100%. I find that it's a strange thing to say that, I've become a leader, anyone's become a leader. I think it's really a litmus test is, what does your team think? What do the people around you think? And often I think the way that you can understand that is the way that they're doing in their own role. Are they happy within their own role? Are they getting the most out of it? I think when you allow, as a leader, people to make their own decisions, to have that initiative, empower them to then drive improvements. I mean, one of the big things that I think about and speak a lot about is welcoming criticism. We've got to want to know where we're going wrong. And I think good leaders, at the point in which you allow people to suggest improvements and you take that on board, and I think that really shows a good level of leadership, where you can actually allow that and use that to drive your decisions. And I think leaders cannot be just leaders exclusively in their professional capacity. I think also in their personal capacity, they need to show leadership. And I think this is a common thread amongst leaders, is that you can tell that they've got a strong sense of who they are, and where they want to go, and that's both in their personal life and in their professional life. And it's crucial that you do understand those things. And I don't think anyone thinks that they're at the finish line when it comes to being a leader. So I don't think you ever hit a mark and go, you know what, I'm a leader, I'm going to give my job title of leader. I don't think that doesn't happen. It's about just taking those incremental steps once again, and realizing there's always room for improvement, whether that's in your own leadership style, whether that's in your own business, whether that's in your own life, where you want to drive improvements, lead people around you to want to do more, give them the scope to do more, and then empower those decisions. And just like in the previous answers, about making mistakes and making decisions and not having all the information, once again, you've got to allow that benchmark to happen to the team. They're also going to be making mistakes. There's also going to be improvements, but it's about, being the first person to say, that's okay, I've been there. Okay, how do we now resolve it?
Definitely. What common misconceptions do people often have about leaders and about leadership?
Yeah, I think leadership is quite a sort of powerful, a loaded word in a sense. That you say you are a leader, it's almost, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, and sometimes that in itself can be mismanaged, and there's a misperception that maybe when someone becomes a leader, they do have a lot of sway, or they do have quite a lot of almost authority in the way that they speak or the decisions that they make, and that's exactly why they're put in that position. But I would say that you have to be, as a leader, you do have to be humble, and ensure that just because maybe you have, it is your responsibility to make those bigger decisions, that you're doing that with the people who are affected by that in mind constantly. And you can't sway around doing something for your own benefit, or something that's not got either within the care perspective, the people that you're caring for, the managers who will be delivering it, or the care team members who will also be delivering the care, and they're the most important people, and often the most affected by some of the decisions that are made. And I think sometimes people have misconceptions about leaders having the ability to enforce strict policies and procedures, and you have to do it like this, and and being flexible. But I think it's more important that you are extremely flexible, and you understand the reasons behind your decisions. So from a leader, they often have a different vantage point, because they have a lot more, for example, within a business, they have a lot more exposure to the different parts of the business. So they're obviously taking decisions based on all of those different parts. But sometimes when then the people who are affected by those decisions don't maybe understand exactly why that decision's been made, it's then incumbent on a leader to say, okay, instead of saying this is the way, and that's because we've done that, how can I now clearly communicate exactly why I've taken that decision and what information I've used to take that decision, and having that open discussion and having a culture of that open discussion. And I think that's extremely important, and taking things by a case-by-case basis. I think especially when you look at the care industry and it's very labor intensive, there's a lot of people, you have to understand that, or at least I try to understand that you've got to create that personable environment where you can actually make decisions on a case-by-case basis within the framework of whatever policies and procedures you have. And I think leadership also can be sort of taught and mentored and developed over time. And people, when they understand more and more why you've made these decisions, they then have a wider perception, and then they can understand that, and then them in themselves make decisions based on that understanding. And then that's, I believe, how they become leaders as well over time.
Great, thank you. And what would you say the difference is between a good leader and a great leader?
Yeah, I think good leaders often fantastic, incredible at following a blueprint, seeing where other great leaders have gone before them, and drawn on those experiences, but drawn on those people. I think within anyone's life, whether it's the personal or professional capacity, you have certain people in your life that you draw experiences from, you draw qualities from, you see the way that they do things. And I think good leaders are able to absorb all of that, and then effectively communicate that. So all of the things that we've spoken about before, I think really make someone a good leader. And I think those things can be developed over time. I would say where that then changes to a great leader, where great leaders across history, but also just within business, for example, you'll see that they'll completely go off the status quo, and they'll find a new angle, a new solution that just wasn't there before. And I feel great leaders are able to see things in a different way. The good leaders, where, as I say, they have that blueprint. Great leaders are able to, once again, back to sort of analogous thinking, take different solutions from different situations that seemingly don't really have much to do with the initial problem that they're trying to solve. And I think it's personal responsibility is a really important thing for great leaders, is they're able to take charge of their own decisions, and set an example of that for the team, because there will be times where, as I said, the decisions are made, or that personal responsibility is extremely important, because people need to make so many decisions, especially within a care setting. I mean, the amount of decisions just within a half an hour care visit that happens, for someone to take that responsibility and take into consideration sort of the person that they're caring for. I think great leaders there can show, can be within, as I say, all spectrums within a business, and that's because they take that personal responsibility. You know, I am going to do this because it's in the best interest of the person that I'm caring for. Or a great leader would say, I'm doing this, I mean, on a much more macro scale, you know, a prime minister or something, I'm taking this personal responsibility of this decision because I believe that's the direction that we need to go in. So whether it's the micro decisions or the bigger decisions, I think both, it's so essential that leaders really take that responsibility and take that and take the slack. I think you've got to take a lot of slack with those decisions. I think you make a decision, and I think rightfully, people's first thing is to question, you know, is that the right thing? Is that the right thing? And you can be hesitant. I think everyone is hesitant when they make certain decisions, and I think it's right, because if not, you know, you're completely blinded and you're not taking into consideration any new information. So, but going back to, you know, having that commitment to your vision and then taking responsibility within that really makes you sort of a great leader.
Fantastic, thank you. What would you say the top 3 most important characteristics are for leaders?
I would say, first of all, is grit. It's not one that I don't think you hear much about, but it's so important because it's inevitable. No matter what you do, no matter what project you start, or what company, or what personal health goal you have, there's going to be days where you wake up and you don't want to go to the gym. You know, that's the last thing you want to do. You've just had a long day at work or something, and you don't. And it's about both from sort of a motivational perspective, saying, oh, you know, I can do this, and almost training yourself to really enjoy the challenge, enjoy the harder times, because you know that you're looking to get this goal, this vision later down the line. And it's not something with grit. It's not something that it's day in, one day you do it. It's day in, day out. It's over weeks, months, and years, and it's following through on the commitments as well that you have. And I think the second important characteristic I would say is having that clear vision. I've mentioned it a few times, but having a vision that people can coalesce around and that you can have a way to then execute that, I think then drives people's own motivation. So going back to their own psychology, your team psychology, it drives that. And having a vision often puts everyone out of your comfort zone. I mean, a good vision isn't let's stay where we are for the next X amount of years. It's let's see where we're going. So you've got to be out your comfort zone. And I think that's so important because you can then really achieve something that you possibly didn't think was possible before. And I would say lastly as well, you have to have humility. I think there's one phrase that the loudest person in the room speaks the least. And I think good leaders have that humility of knowing when to talk, when to say their opinion, and when to give that over, or when to allow people to take ownership of their decisions, and you empower them and don't always have to chime in with your own way of doing things, because there is multiple ways to get to one particular goal. And I think that's important throughout different parts of the business, because you can't micromanage decisions. So you need to trust in your team. I think trust is important, but having that humility to then be able to trust people.
Three great choices there. I I like all of them. So thank you for that. So we've kind of touched upon this a little bit with some of the things that we've talked about before, but how would you say that leadership is evolving over time?
Yeah, I think over time, leadership will continue to evolve. And I think the most important factor is really access to information. I think good leaders need to be able to process information, but there's obviously so much information that you can. So whether it's on a particular subject, I mean, even if you look over time, there was another book that Zero Marginal Cost, and it talked about how initially it was spoken word, and then we went to the printing press, then the web. And you think each time how much more people are gaining information and how much cheaper that's becoming. And then you come to social media as well. And now it's pretty much zero cost to get any information. Anyone can become an expert in any field that previously you would have had to have a degree or devoted your whole life to get that experience. So I think that's really interesting. I think leaders need to be on top of the new information, but be able to sieve or whittle down the most important information, or the most important sort of new innovations, technology, a new way of doing things. And I think when you talk about new way of doing things, I think the pandemic's been a lesson for a lot of leaders, where just a great example of that, I think, is the work-life balance. And we talk of and hear of the Great Resignation, and the need to be more flexible with the workforce. And I think hybrid working, if you think hybrid working, if you said a few years ago that working from home and 2 days, 3 days a week would be something that would be permanent, I mean, I think some people still are getting used to the fact that this now pretty much is permanent for quite a significant portion as to what was previously. And it's incumbent on leaders again to take in that information. Okay, this is what sort of the priorities are of the team, and sometimes the priorities are spending more time at home, having a bit more flexibility within their working environment, and taking on that. I think there was another example of Microsoft going down to a 4-day working week in Japan, and sort of the benefits there. And I thought that was really interesting as well. And it's about hearing of these things and seeing, you know, could this be applicable? Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you. So what would you say the biggest challenges that you faced as a leader, and what have you learned as a consequence?
Yeah, there's been quite a few challenges, as you can imagine, but I think that the pandemic was one of them. But I think the pandemic, with the team that we had, with the dedication, commitment shown by all the team, they definitely overcome that challenge, and I think I owe a lot to the team that was the case. But personally, I think my biggest challenge is back in 2019. I went to a conference. I won't say the provider because we now don't use them, and there's some choice words about their vision. And I went to this conference of the software provider we were using at the time, and I thought, oh, this is going to be really exciting. We're going to see their roadmap for the future, and they're going to make a transition into having loads more features, and that's going to drive efficiency within the business. And I got there, and their big 2-year plan was to add an iOS app as well as their Android app. And I think it was at that moment that I stopped and thought, okay, I come personally from a background of finance and economics, and where everyone's so technologically adept, and it's used so fundamentally within the business that I then go and think, wow, it's iOS is the next 2 years. And I came straight back to the business, and I was speaking about the conference and said, look, we need to change. And I demoed, I believe it was around 14 different, some were in their beta version, some were startups, some were, fully fledged software providers. And then we picked one. Then it was about convincing the team of this decision, in 2019, let's all transfer. Let's embrace that this is the new, if we believe that in 5 years time, we're going to make this transition, let's make it now, because these are going to make improvements now. This is going to make your life easier now. And it's difficult to sort of convince or at least explain why that overhaul is necessary. But it's definitely my biggest challenge, because the transition, the way that I had to communicate that it was necessary, just then rewriting how we do things for the better. Well, it's definitely been evident it's been for the better. I think now, as we say, that's where the whole care market's going, and rightfully so, because I think there's so many improvements that can come from that. But definitely convincing, addressing people's concerns, and really overcoming the difficulty. But then, because you knew it was something that would be beneficial, now the team, can't wait for what the new bit of technology or the new way of doing things. And I think that's an important culture as well, is to be fine with change and to embrace it.
Definitely can't argue with that. Which leaders inspire you the most personally?
Yeah, there are obviously quite loads of leaders that people could draw upon for different points and different perspectives. And I think, just within care, for example, I think Professor Martin Green, at every conference I go to, I think he's absolutely fantastic in the way that he communicates the needs of the social care sector. I think he's really important. I think on a personal level, though, my granddad was a businessman himself. He developed a good business, but it wasn't really that I really draw upon or get inspiration from. It was knowing him so closely. It was the good habits he had day in, day out, just whether that be exercising, whether that be, fasted on 3 days a week, which I think is not many people would have that self, would be able to control themselves, that self-control to even be able to do something like that, or showing up to work exactly at the same time, leaving exactly at the same time, and having that routine. And I think good habits are so important. Having that routine is so important. And he really displayed that rigorously. And yeah, that was a big inspiration. But I would say one of the people that I keep track of and love reading about is Elon Musk. I think the way that he just pinpoints a problem and then just has no hesitation in building something to solve it. I can't think of anyone else that thinks, okay, in the future, we're going to need a lot more electricity. We're going to need a lot more renewable energy. So I'm going to be involved in Solar City. Then we need electric vehicles. So I'm going to go into Tesla. We need tunnels in LA because per mile that's cheaper than the railway that they were trying to build. Let's do the Boring Company. We need Starlink satellites, internet connections. So let's do that. Neuralink, we need to be somehow intertwined with technology. So he has that. Someone who can be so well versed in all of these different things and seemingly trying to solve that problem is absolutely incredible. And I think the way that this manifests itself is that Tesla, up until recently, I don't know if this is still the case, but especially up until very recently, they didn't have a marketing department. They didn't do any marketing. You'd see many other car makers constantly with them TV ads and things like that. And it's just in having a Tesla, it says so much about you, sustainability, caring about the environment, and to think that that all comes across without any adverts. And it's really through his leadership, through his personality, that people buy into sort of that vision. So I think he's a really important person in terms of, well, a lot of different problems that we face. And it's really interesting to keep up to date with sort of what's his next challenge that he's looking to overcome.
Three great leaders right there. I think that's fair to say. I must say, particularly impressed with the 3-day fast. I fast for 18 hours a day, every day. Yeah, I tend to get pretty hungry after lunch, so that's pretty impressive within of itself. So, Charles, what would you say that the best piece of leadership advice is that you've ever been given?
I think this is a bit of an oxymoron in a way, because the most important bit of advice I got was to not take advice from people who haven't done it themselves. And I think that was always taken with a pinch of salt. It wasn't meant completely literally, because once again, you have to have the humility to be able to take on advice. But I think what that says is, or at least the way that I perceive it, is if you're taking advice from loads of different people around you, some people may say that this is never going to work for X, Y, Z reasons, or someone else may say, oh, go on, do it, but they don't really know what it takes to do it. They really don't know what it takes to get that over the line. So I think, it's about taking on that advice, but then realizing that each individual person has, them unique experience, has a unique view, has a unique capability, has a unique grit, drive, humility, whatever it may be, with those qualities, and that you're probably best placed to know that, whether you feel that that's sort of the right pursuit that you want to take. So it's about being resilient and true to what your vision is. And I think taking too much heed to sometimes, because as I say, there's going to be loads of people on both sides of it. And I think you have to know where you want to go, and then be welcoming to any advice, but not change your course unless something really changes your mind about something.
Nice. Yeah, I hear you. Okie doke. Last question. So you're standing at a lectern in front of a room of aspiring leaders, and you've got one minute to inspire them. What do you say?
I would first of all say, you are where you're supposed to be. And I think that phrase allows people to have some comfort and patience in where they are at the moment. And you don't always have to be the high-flying person now or succeeding like this person. And you don't always have to look around you at what people are doing. You are where you're supposed to be. And that is part of your own journey. And as long as you're focused on there's a economics term called match quality, and it's where what someone does and who they are should combine in a way. And you can always try and find that, but there's loads of different ways to get there. One person might be a candidate for a role and they've been doing that role for 5 years, or someone's had 5 different jobs and it gives them a unique perspective for that particular role. So there is no right way, and you just need to realize that you can get there taking a different path.
Nice. I think that's a great way to wrap things up, and they were really, really well considered questions as well. So Charles, it's been an absolute pleasure having the conversation with you today. Really, really insightful in so many different ways. It was a pleasure having you on this Leadership Insights podcast, and hopefully this is the first of many podcasts and different discussions that we'll have over the year. So yeah, really great to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon, for having me.